Have you ever felt a presence in an empty room, seen movement at the edge of your vision, only for it to vanish the moment you turn your head? For millions of people across the world, these aren't tricks of the light, they aren't imagination, and they aren't dreams, they are encounters with something known only as shadow people. Silent figures made of darkness, watching, waiting, always just out of reach until they aren't, and the most unsettling question witnesses are left with isn't what they are, it's why they're here. What are shadow people? Shadow people are most often described as dark, human-shaped figures with no discernible features, no eyes, no mouths, no faces at all, just silhouettes, darker than the darkness around them. They appear suddenly, usually in peripheral vision, as if they don't want to be seen directly. Many witnesses say the moment they try to focus on them, the figure vanishes instantly, as if it was never there at all. Others aren't so lucky. Some shadow people are reported wearing hats or long coats. The most infamous of these is known as the Hat Man, a tall figure often described with a wide-brimmed hat and long limbs, standing motionless while observing. What unites almost every encounter is the overwhelming sense of dread. Not fear, not surprise, dread. A deep, instinctive terror that tells the witness something is very wrong. Unlike traditional ghosts, shadow people don't appear transparent or misty. They don't drift, they don't flicker. Many witnesses describe them as flat, almost two-dimensional, like cutouts of darkness pasted into reality. And most disturbingly, they don't always disappear when the lights come on. Story 1. The Figure in the Hallway. A woman living alone in a small apartment began noticing something strange shortly after switching to night shifts. Around 2 a.m., she would feel an intense pressure like she was being watched. One night while walking to the bathroom, she noticed a tall shadow standing at the end of her hallway. It didn't move, it didn't react, it just stood there perfectly still, darker than the surrounding darkness. She blinked, and it was gone. The next night, it was closer. By the end of the week, it stood just outside her bedroom door. The feeling she described wasn't panic, it was the certainty that the thing was learning her routine. She moved out within the month. Story 2. The Hat Man. The nurse had worked night shifts for nearly a decade. She was used to exhaustion, hallucinations brought on by fluorescent lights and long hours, and the quiet dread that settles into hospital corridors after midnight. But this was different. The first time she saw him, it was just after 2 a.m. She was charting vitals at the nurse's station when she noticed a shape at the far end of the East Wing hallway. A tall, impossibly thin silhouette standing beneath a flickering light. At first, she assumed it was a doctor or a visitor who had wandered where they shouldn't. Then she noticed the hat. It was wide-brimmed, perfectly defined, resting atop a head that had no visible features. No face, no eyes, just a darker absence carved into the dim hallway. She blinked. The figure was gone. She didn't think about it again until 30 minutes later, when a patient in room 214 went into cardiac arrest. The second sighting happened the next night. Same hallway, same time, same figure. This time, she didn't blink. The Hat Man stood motionless, hands at his sides, head angled slightly toward a patient's room, not toward her. He wasn't watching the hallway. He was watching someone die. Moments later, the call light went off. Another code blew. Another failed resuscitation. Over the next several weeks, a pattern emerged, one she tried desperately not to acknowledge. Whenever the Hat Man appeared, someone died within minutes. Always the same posture, always the same distance from the room, always gone by the time the body was wheeled away. The fear wasn't immediate. What unsettled her most was how familiar he felt, as if he belonged there. One night, after losing 3 patients in a single shift, she asked a senior nurse about the figure. She chose her words carefully, expecting laughter or concern for her mental health. Instead, the older nurse went quiet. She leaned closer and whispered, "You don't point him out, you don't look too long, and you never talk about him near the rooms." When pressed, the nurse only said this, "He's been here longer than we have." The sightings intensified after that. The Hat Man began appearing closer, not always at the end of the hallway anymore. sometimes standing just outside a patient's door, sometimes reflected faintly in the glass of a supply cabinet. Once, she saw him standing behind her reflection. She never turned around. The worst night came when she recognized the room he was watching. It was her patient, a middle-aged man recovering from routine surgery, stable, alert, talking just hours earlier. The Hat Man stood outside the doorway, head tilted as if listening. She felt a sudden certainty. Not fear, but understanding. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't death following him. He was waiting. She refused to enter the room. Another nurse went instead. Minutes later, the monitor screamed. The man died without explanation. After that night, the Hat Man stopped appearing to her entirely, but the deaths didn't stop. Other nurses began whispering about a shadow in a hat. Doctors avoided the East Wing during overnight hours. Cameras in that hallway malfunctioned regularly, always cutting out between 1:45 and 3:15 a.m. The nurse transferred hospitals. Years later, she still wakes up at night with the same certainty she felt in that hallway, that the Hat Man isn't a harbinger of death. He's not a warning, he's a witness, and once you see him, he never needs to appear for you again. Story 3. The Child Who Waved Back. A mother noticed her young son waving at something in the corner of his bedroom. When asked who he was waving to, the child replied, "The dark man." He described a tall shadow that stood near his closet every night. Sometimes it waved back, sometimes it just watched. When the mother checked the room, there was nothing there. The child began sleeping during the day instead. He said the dark man didn't like it when he was asleep at night. Why do they appear at night? Most shadow person encounters happen late at night or during periods of exhaustion, illness, or emotional stress. Some researchers suggest the brain is vulnerable during these moments, the barrier between consciousness and something else thinning. Others believe night is simply when shadow people are strongest. Witnesses often say the figures don't react to light the way normal shadows do. Turning on lamps doesn't always make them disappear. Sometimes it makes them clearer. Story 4. The Shadow That Followed Him. A truck driver working overnight routes reported seeing a shadow figure standing beside the highway. At first, he thought it was a person. Then it stepped forward, impossibly fast, and vanished. The next night, it appeared again, closer. Eventually, he began seeing it in his rearview mirror, then reflected in store windows, then standing across the street from his home. It stopped appearing only after he quit night driving, but he still checks mirrors instinctively. Story 5. The Bedroom Visitor. A woman awoke to the feeling of someone sitting on her bed. She couldn't move. At the foot of the bed stood a shadow figure, tall and thin, its head tilted unnaturally. She described the sensation as being drained, like something was feeding on her fear. When she finally screamed, the figure dissolved into the darkness. The mattress indentation remained. What do shadow people want? This is where accounts grow darker. Some believe shadow people feed on fear, stress, or emotional energy. Others think they observe, study, or even mark people. A disturbing number of witnesses report recurring encounters. As if once noticed, the shadow notices back, and it remembers. Story 6. The Shadow That Learned Routines. A man working overnight security noticed a shadow pacing the perimeter cameras, always at the same times, always learning. One night the shadow appeared on camera inside the building, standing exactly where the guard would arrive next. The guard quit the next morning. The cameras continued recording movement long after. Story 7. The Shadow That Spoke. Most shadow people are silent. This one wasn't. A man living in a rural home heard his name whispered from the hallway. When he looked, a shadow figure stood there. It leaned forward and spoke again, in his own voice. He never responded. The figure vanished. The whispers continued for weeks. Story 8. The Shadow in the Crowd. A man saw a shadow figure standing among a busy subway crowd, completely still while everyone else moved. When their eyes met, the shadow stepped closer. No one noticed, except him. Story 9. The Shadow That Didn't Leave. A man suffering from insomnia began seeing shadow figures nightly. When his sleep improved, they didn't stop. They moved freely in his home. One night he saw one standing over his sleeping body in a mirror reflection. He moved out. The shadow didn't follow. Story 10. When It Realizes You See It. A man had been seeing a shadow in his home for months. At first, it was nothing more than movement in his peripheral vision, a shape passing doorways, a flicker at the edge of the room. Every time he turned his head, it was gone. He told himself it was stress, fatigue, his mind playing tricks on him. One night, he decided not to look away. He was sitting in his living room with the lights off, television muted, letting the darkness settle. The familiar movement appeared near the hallway entrance, a tall, human-shaped shadow standing where no shadow should exist. This time, he stared directly at it. The shadow didn't vanish. Instead, it froze. For several seconds, nothing happened. The room felt heavier, like the air itself had thickened. Then the figure did something it had never done before. It turned its head, slowly, deliberately, not toward the room, toward him. The terror was immediate and absolute, the certainty that something fundamental had changed. This wasn't accidental anymore. The shadow had been aware of him the entire time, and now it knew that he was aware of it. The figure leaned forward slightly, its outline growing darker, more defined, as if focusing. The man couldn't move. His body reacted before his mind could. Then the shadow stepped closer, not by walking, but by appearing closer. The man squeezed his eyes shut. When he opened them again, the shadow was gone. But from that night on, it appeared openly, standing in doorways, at the foot of his bed, in mirrors, always facing him, because the moment he truly noticed it, it noticed him back. Shadow people don't announce themselves, they don't knock, they don't chase, they wait. They exist in the corners of rooms, in moments of exhaustion, in the spaces between waking and sleep. And whether they're entities, manifestations, or something older still, the people who've seen them agree on one thing. Once you notice them, they never forget you. Tonight, when the lights are off and the room goes quiet, pay attention to the corners. Some shadows aren't cast by anything at all. Let me know in the comments your shadow person experience. Please like and subscribe for more terrifying tales from the Fiend.